Hey guys, and welcome to Diabetic 365. And today we have a very special guest, Megan. She has been type 1 diabetic from 16 years. She was diagnosed when she was 24, and now she is 41, very energetic, doing marathons, and she is here to share this story with us. Hey Megan, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, when were you first diagnosed, and what was it like, and your whole 16 years of type 1 diabetes life?
Sure. Well, what happened? I was in my early 20s, and diabetes was actually something that was sort of like the boogeyman growing up because there's a lot of type 1 diabetes on my mom's side of the family, and she's a nurse, so she's was very conscious about that. So when my sister and I were growing up, it was always like if we showed excessive thirst, she would, be nervous that I was showing symptoms of diabetes. But I made it through my childhood, my adolescence, thinking I was out of the woods because really at that time, type 1 was considered to be juvenile diabetes.
Uh-huh.
And then in my early 20s, I came with the diagnosis, and it was they say that with type 1 that there's a genetic influence, but also an environmental trigger.
Uh-huh.
And mine, I know what it was. Went to Mexico and I got this weird respiratory sickness in the summertime, and by the fall I had dropped like 25 pounds, and was showing all those classic symptoms: the thirst, the just having to pee all the time, and just all those symptoms. So I went to the doctor, and sure enough, I got the diagnosis, and I actually go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the doctor that I went to was my doctor from growing up, and he really had no knowledge of diabetes. So he sort of said, well, let me write you a prescription for insulin. Your mom's a nurse. She can help you figure out how to, dispense with the insulin. And it was, such a, like a drop off the cliff for me. Like, what, this is my new life now? What does this mean? Can I never have a, piece of cake again? It was really, it was a long journey to find education and also, kind of inner peace with having this disease.
So you were almost in college at that time when you were diagnosed, right?
Actually, out of college because I was almost 25. So I was out of college. I was working. Sort of into my young adult life, and here I was just thrown this major curveball.
So here's the question, interesting question. So many people are skeptical about disclosing their diabetes to their co-workers or at school. So how comfortable were you when you were diagnosed 16 years back to disclose this with your co-workers or anyone you're working with at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wasn't comfortable at all. I was very private about it, and I still am private about it to an extent. But for me, there was some. Shame is kind of a strong word for it, but I just didn't feel comfortable talking about it. I didn't want to seem like I needed special treatment, or there was something wrong with me, or I couldn't do what everybody else did. So, and my the job that I took on shortly after being diagnosed was working in book publicity, which is what I do now, but I was an assistant for a very busy executive who would just, be throwing work at me, and there'd be like never time for a break, and I could feel my blood sugar going down, and I never ever felt the confidence or comfortable enough to say, hey, I need to stop for 2 minutes and, have a snack, and then I can help you. So, it really has been a 16-year odyssey to feel like I can make that statement for, for my health and, for my safety.
I'm going to come to that part next, but before that, so you're very young, 24 at that time, and you might be looking out for your life partner. So the question is, how comfortable were you to disclose this with your life partner at that time, and how was your adult age at that time, getting married and that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough because I was at that age where I'm dating and going out with different people, and it's not the kind of thing you want to bring up in casual conversation. You really want to feel like you have a level of trust with someone before you want to talk about that. And then the other factor is I wear an insulin pump, so I have a visible sign of my disease on my body. So dealing with that and intimacy, I mean, it was a real struggle. And I'd have to say, like, it wasn't until I met my husband at age 34 that I met someone I felt completely comfortable with and safe with, that I could let it all hang out. Yeah, and my husband will change my insulin pump, and he'll get up in the middle of the night for me to get me a glass of juice if I'm low. So that's a real struggle.
So the other thing is, so you said you have a very demanding job from 16 years, and now you're being in executive position in the publishing world. So how are you managing this demanding job versus diabetes?
Oh gosh, I mean, I still find myself sometimes, I'm in desperate need of a snack, but I've been on conference calls and I'm like in the middle of my projects, and I'm starting to feel a little sweaty and lightheaded and realizing, I should have had that snack. So I definitely still get in those situations, but I try and be conscious of them, and I try and take time. And I'm not that little harried assistant anymore. I have more control and autonomy of how I do my work. So, it's a lot easier to manage the diabetes and also manage all my authors and the busyness of my work.
Uh-huh. So, instead of having diabetes, you never stopped. You did marathons, and you're still doing it. So, how did you prepare for a marathon having type 1 diabetes? Because your blood sugar sometimes will drop low when you're doing marathon, and there are all sorts of reasons for not doing a marathon if you have diabetes. So tell us, how did you achieve this?
Well, I'd always been a runner, and I found running was a great way to control my blood sugars. In addition to to insulin, I found I could say I had my breakfast, I could take less insulin and go for a run and still keep my sugars balanced. So I found it was a great tool, and the marathon to me just seemed like the ultimate challenge. Like, it's so difficult for most regular people to do it. Could I do it, with this disease? And it really was just being very conscious and sensitive to my body. When I would train for long runs, I'd eat a fairly high carb breakfast and not take any insulin, and then just burn down my blood sugar on the run. I'd have this big fanny pack where I'd have my glucose monitor and sugar, some form of sugar, and all the things I needed to take care of myself along the run. And I found it worked really well, and it was a great way to manage my blood sugars and to watch my weight, and it gave me freedom to eat a little more of the things that I like to eat. So, it was great. It was a really positive experience, and I'd recommend it to anyone.
So, do you have any kind of complications in your 16 years of diabetes life?
No, not so far. I mean, fingers crossed. I just went to the eye doctor, and every time I go, he says, looking in your eyes, I'd never know you had diabetes. So, I have to say I live in fear of, getting, as time goes on and, the disease takes its toll, what's going to happen with that. But so far, I really I've done my best to, manage the disease, but also live my life and not be a slave to it. Mm-hmm. So far, so good.
That's very good to hear. So now you have a child. He's very healthy, 3 years kid. So did you have any kind of complication while you're having this baby? And also, many people tend to have a little bit of complications if they're type 1 or type 2 for that matter, diabetes, or if they have even gestational, they find it a little difficult at the time of birth. So As a type 1 diabetic, so did you have any kind of complication, or what was your experience at that time?
Well, what my husband and I did is we went to see a high-risk OB a year before we even were hoping that I would be pregnant, because we wanted to find out what the risks were. I think I was 35 at the time, and that's already getting into high-risk territory. So, and the doctor said, your your A1C is good. He said, you should be able to do this just fine. And so I was, particularly careful, watching keeping my A1C as low as possible. I got pregnant, and I ended up having a really, trouble-free pregnancy. That, the doctors were certainly all over me because of my age and the type 1 diabetes, which was good. They were very, careful of everything I did, but I was allowed to exercise all through my pregnancy. And I think one of the things, probably the most surprising thing with pregnancy, was the first and second trimesters. I had a lot of low blood sugars that would just spring on me, out of, I do everything right. You know how it is, like you do everything right, and so you get this like random number, and I would, wake up in the middle of the night with like blood sugar at like 40 or 50. So I struggled with that in the first 2 trimesters, and then I went to the other extreme in the third trimester, where I needed, I think it was like 3 times the amount of my normal insulin. Mm-hmm. So that was really hard to cope with, because it was, so much insulin for the things I would eat normally. So, it was really a learning curve. I had great support from my doctors and my diabetes educator and my nutritionist. So, it worked out well. I had a 8.5-pound son born from C-section, and he's healthy and happy and great.
That's very good. So, tell us some of the things you learned hard way in your 16 years of diabetes life.
Oh gosh, let's see. What did I learn the hard way? I think, and I have to admit, I still struggle with it. Figuring out how to assert my needs and still be normal, I guess. Like for example, we were just on vacation, and I'm very careful of what I eat in my own little routine, in my microcosm. And then we were on vacation. We were with other people. We were staying at other, we were guests at other people's homes, where it's really hard to, say, oh, well, I can't eat that and I really want this. My preference is more to kind of go with the flow and try and make it work. And it's hard because, I definitely had higher blood sugars than I do at home. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I don't know what the answer is, because you don't want to be that person who, says, I can't eat this, and, it has to be my way. So, I don't know. I think it's a struggle that a lot of us probably deal with.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your thoughts and your 16 years of diabetes life. Thank you so much for picking up time and taking out your time from office hours. Thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Megan. Thanks for having me. Okay,
Thank you so much. You have a nice day.
You too.